Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fearlessly Authentic. I'm your host, Jody Harrison Bauer, and I am so excited for today's show. If you are a new time listener to Fearlessly Authentic, this is the place where we educate you, empower you with that information, and inspire you to live your most fearlessly authentic life. Because in my humble opinion, if we're not doing that, or at least trying to do that every single day, what the heck are we doing here? So remember to subscribe, rate, and review. We love to hear from you. I love to get questions from you. So please remember to click on that subscribe button and rate and review. You can find me on all social media platforms at Jody Harrison Bauer, and you can find this podcast on same name and follow me on all social media platforms. And that is it. And today, I am so excited to introduce my guest, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. Welcome to Fearlessly Authentic.
Hi, Jody. I'm really grateful to connect with you. Long time coming.
Me
This
too.
is great.
I know. And it was so interesting how we connected because I'm in the process of writing a book, and I did. And then I scraped it. I was like, nope, scrapped it. I'm not doing this. And so anyway, the woman I'm working with told me about you. And on that same day, you DM'd me. It's
crazy.
the way the universe works.
That's crazy.
I want to introduce you properly to our audience because for those of you who do not know who Dr. Gabrielle Lyon is, buckle up. Here we go. Dr. Gabrielle Lyon is a prominent figure in the field of muscle-centric medicine. She is an accomplished board-certified family physician and a distinguished New York Times bestselling author, lauded for her latest work, Forever Strong, a new science-based strategy for aging well. Her book's exceptional success has also earned her the esteemed titles of Wall Street Journal and USA Today best-selling author. Congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you.
At the forefront of modern medicine, Dr. Lyon is leading a revolutionary movement focusing on the body's largest organ, skeletal muscle. Her mission is to promote longevity and combat the pervasive threats of obesity, heart disease, and diabetes by optimizing muscle health. Dr. Lyon's rich background encompasses a dual research and clinical fellowship in geriatrics and nutritional sciences at WashU, Washington University, complemented by her undergraduate training in nutritional sciences at the University of Illinois. Through her thriving private practice, influential YouTube channel, captivating podcast, and her best-selling book, Dr. Lyon poses a fundamental question. How can we foster strength, not only in the weight room, but in our daily lives? With unwavering dedication to cultivating consistent dietary and lifestyle habits, she empowers individuals to prioritize self-care and better support their loved ones, contributing to a world of enhanced strength and well-being. Dr. Lyon's pioneering work focuses on the vital role that muscle health plays in overall well-being and longevity. Her expertise in muscle physiology, metabolism, and performance optimization has made her a sought-after authority in this rapid evolving field. Whoa, that's a lot. You have been busy.
Yeah.
Very, very busy. You know, for so many years, I've been in the fitness industry for 35 years. And I have been lifting weights for 43 years. And I've been talking about lifting weights for as long as I can remember. And it seems as though there are a lot of people talking, bringing so much attention to the importance of muscle, strength training, healthy diet. You know, we've been talking about healthy diets, but what brought you to get into focusing on muscle-centric medicine?
Quite simply, it was a moment. It was a moment in my fellowship. Again, I did a fellowship at Washington University, and I was looking at the interface between body composition and brain function. And there's been a lot of studies since that time where, oftentimes we were thinking about increasing body fat and this cause or potential risk factor for cognitive impairment, for dementia. And the interesting aspect of it was everyone points to body fat. And I
Mm.
imaged one participant's brain, and she was a representation of someone every single one of your listeners knows. She was a mom. She was in her mid-50s. She had cycled through different types of diets and nutrition plans. She followed the advice of lose weight, exercise more,
Mm.
this whole yo-yo dieting story, which we've all seen. And in the process, she destroyed her skeletal muscle. She had a high body fat percentage, but really she had low skeletal muscle mass. And I will never forget imaging her brain and thinking to myself, this woman doesn't know what she's in store for.
Mm.
And we failed her.
Mm.
We as a medical society had failed her. What had been communicated, the interventions that were given, nothing was meaningful enough to really move the needle. And I had this aha moment. I think every single one of us in our career has a moment where we change our perspective, or it's just this light bulb that goes off. And I realized that we were focusing on the wrong tissue, that we didn't have a body fat problem, that we actually had a muscle mass problem, and that people were not over fat, they were under muscled.
Mm.
And I will say that I was lucky enough to be very interested in fitness and muscle um, early on in my training, not in my physical training, but in my education. And so the conditions were right
Mm.
and primed for a new idea.
And this is something you grew up working out,
I did.
figuring out how to eat healthy. Could we go back there for a minute and share with our listeners maybe some of the struggles that you had? Because somebody looking at you right now says, well, she knows everything. She knows, she's always known all this, but where did some of the struggles occur?
Yeah, so I did my undergraduate at the University of Illinois in human nutrition, vitamin mineral metabolism. I, before I got to my undergraduate, I graduated high school early and I moved in with my godmother. Her name is Liz Lipsky. She's a PhD in nutritional sciences, one of the OGs of the functional medicine space.
Mm.
If anyone knows functional medicine, they'll definitely know Liz. This was the group before Mark Hyman. So this was, she's in her 70s now.
Mm.
Um, and I started to see the influence of nutrition. I had always been fit. I was on the dance team. I did track and then soccer and then dance, but I never thought about nutrition. From a young age, both my parents were extremely athletic. And I would say growing up, weight wasn't an issue. It just wasn't even something we thought about. But on the flip side of that, I didn't really think about nutrition and I didn't think about nutritional sciences very much. When I got to Hawaii, when I moved in with Liz, I started to see the impact nutrition played on people's lives. And it was incredible. It was so meaningful. It was not just about the food, but it was about all these things and this interface. Um, and so I decided, well, that's it. I'm going to study nutritional sciences. This is my way forward. I got to my undergraduate and I realized that eating, quote, healthy, I was vegan for a period of time, and then I was vegetarian for a period of time, for long periods of time. And
Was
I
this like
thought,
in the 80s, 90s? Not to talk
yeah,
about how old you are.
this
Um,
was, so I graduated college 2000. I went to medical school around early 2000s, 2001.
okay.
So this was, 20
I'm
years
just
ago.
trying to, yeah, I'm just trying to think of like what was going on in the world of,
Yeah.
in the
Nutrition.
90s, it was snack wells, right?
Yeah, I would say it
So,
was still that. Yeah, I mean,
okay.
this was
I
more
was
like
just,
the 2000s, but SnackWell's
okay.
was a big deal.
Right.
Everyone was eating kind of lower fat,
Right.
but I was really interested in eating lower fat, which I had always done, but all the organic foods, and as long as it was a whole carbohydrate, rice and beans. I mean, I was very much into macrobiotics. I don't know if you know what
Mm.
that is,
Hmm.
but I really struggled. I became extremely anxious around food because it had to be perfect. I really wanted it to be right. I wanted to um, do the right thing for my body. And instead of it being this very easy, intuitive way, It was like, well, are these almonds organic? And why am I so hungry? I was training a lot, and
Mm.
I knew nothing about the balance of my macros. I knew only about the quality of food. And I think that you still hear that a lot. It's all about the quality. And well, I mean, I guess we're moving into an era where it is about macros. I think we've probably been there for the last 10 years. But I really struggled. I struggled with my hunger. I struggled with overeating because I wasn't getting the nutrients I needed.
Right. So
And
you were hungry and then you would
oh my gosh,
binge on
yes,
something that
yeah,
was
totally.
lacking in total nutrition, right? Carb, high sugar. Yeah.
So what would happen is I was so hungry. I was very
Mm.
low protein, which is funny to think about and say that my diet was primarily carbohydrates. And as anyone who is listening probably has experienced, that when your diet is nearly skewed, I don't know, 80% carbohydrates. I mean, it was just very high in carbs. Maybe it was a little less than that, but very high in carbs I really struggled to control my blood sugar. I really struggled with
Right.
maintaining my energy. I was
Ex
anemic.
Can we
Yeah,
stop there for a second? So when you're talking about maintaining your blood sugar, when you're on a high carbohydrate diet and you're working out as often as you are,
yeah,
training hard,
yeah. I was tired all the time.
right, you were tired all the time because you
Tired all
weren't
the
eating
time.
enough protein. So can you just explain to the listeners what happens when you're
Ugh,
eating
yeah,
high carbohydrate, low protein diet?
yeah,
And we'll get more into it, but just at this
yeah.
juncture.
So basically, I was eating a very high carbohydrate diet. I would sit down with a bowl of rice. It was just very unbalanced. Say a bowl of rice and maybe some fruit. About 30 minutes after that, I was so tired,
Starving.
I would have to nap.
Mm.
I'd have to nap. What likely happened was a few things. You have a high carbohydrate load, which is, it could be rice, potatoes, it could even be fruit, it could be, pick your choice of carbohydrates. And the way that the body manages glucose, which is ultimately typically where carbohydrates end up, is it increases insulin. When you increase insulin, you move then glucose out of the bloodstream into muscle, other tissues, and it can drop your blood sugar. Also, with a high carbohydrate diet, there's more, depending on how you do it, more volume of the food that you're eating. You're now stretching your stomach. There's a whole host of other peptides and hormones and things that are secreted when you do that. And yeah, I was exhausted all the time.
So the dips and the surges,
Yeah,
which is something, I remember before I got this was my first job out of college. I was working at in retail, and I remember after eating a meal that was not rich in protein because I didn't really know a lot about food and so on back then. And I remember getting really cold afterwards and really tired. Everybody would be really tired after they ate. And I think about that, the dips and the surges in the blood glucose levels. That's
yeah.
what happens. And the goal is to keep them steady throughout the day.
Yeah. I
And
also I believe that, and I think that the evidence supports it, that there's a natural ebb and flow of blood
mhm,
sugar depending on your food. So I would caution people to be really concerned about increasing blood glucose because there is a natural increase, whether it
mhm.
goes to 140 milligrams per deciliter. There is some natural ebb and flow. The problem is when it becomes too high and for too long. And as you're doing this over time, I think that there are negative metabolic effects. You can become more increasingly insulin resistant, requiring your body to make more of this hormone that's released from the pancreas. And over time, we do have to recognize that glucose is toxic to the body. It has to get out of the bloodstream. Um, and so there's, I think, a certain level of ebb and flow, which is normal. And then it's the real highs and the real lows that I believe are problematic.
So that's what was happening to you,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
that you hit a low, you were tired. So what did you do to change that?
Well, I wanted to figure out why. And
Mhm.
I ended up, luckily, very early on in my career, landed in Dr. Donald Lehman's class, who is one of the world leading protein experts. And I started learning about protein. And that changed everything for me.
And
Changed
so
everything. Yeah.
how much protein do we need in a day? Should we jump there, or there's so much to
There's
cover
a lot
here,
to
because
cover.
I do want to cover, because back in the day, nobody even understood what a protein is.
That's right.
Nobody understood, going back on a little bit of my journey, is that nobody knew what a protein was in the 90s. Everybody thought I was crazy for lifting weights. You're going to look like a man.
Isn't
This
that
is what they
crazy?
told me. I was in
It's
my
crazy.
30s and none of my friends worked out. None of them ate healthy. Nobody, when they took our order in a restaurant, they didn't say, "Would you like a protein on that?" I would always add chicken to it. And my friends would say, "What are you doing? Why are you so picky about your food?" Because I knew what was happening to my body right in front of me. I was transforming my body with food and weights.
Hmm.
So if somebody, what do you think is the most confusing thing? Because there's so much information out there right now. How can you clear things up if
Yeah.
somebody's listening to you right now? What can I do right now?
Um, First of all, I love this question. And I'm assuming that your listeners are largely female. Yeah,
They are
largely female. And how old are your listeners?
between
Typically.
30 and 50.
Okay. Here's what I will say. That my journey is interesting, fine, but not uncommon. That everyone here listening likely has experienced some kind of dysregulated relationship with food, whether it is chemistry, whether it is emotional, right? When I say chemistry, I would say what I was dealing with was just I was unbalanced in my blood sugar. So chemistry, emotional, and then potentially habitual. I'm sure there are others, but everybody listening probably at some point in their life has struggled with weight and this relationship with food. I think that
Yeah, it's
that's
very
very
complex.
common. It's very common and very complex. What you need to understand is if you are that person or if you have been there, then there are ways forward that are evidence-based. And what does that mean? You can manage your body composition if you are premenopause, postmenopause, whatever pause you're on. You can manage body composition through evidence-based training as well as nutrition. With the amount of noise in the space, things become very confusing, chaotic, and disheartening. Jody, you are a very good example of, in fact, I was telling you before we started recording, you are a very good example of what the outcomes can be when someone has a foundation of strength training and a higher protein diet. This is critical to age well, period, end of story. It's
Saying that.
what is necessary and what is needed. Now, what does that mean from an action-oriented type of picture? Well, the first thing that you do is you have to understand the importance of skeletal muscle. We understand skeletal muscle to be this metabolic sink for the foods that we eat. We know that, we recognize that. We understand that skeletal muscle is important for mobility and strength. Skeletal muscle is also your body armor. It interfaces with your immune system. It is important for leveraging skeletal muscle as an organ system. When you contract it, it interfaces with every organ system in the body, interfaces with the brain. It releases myokines, which is our small little peptide hormones released from exercising skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle will increase your ability to survive nearly anything. That is interesting.
Can you say that one more time?
Skeletal muscle will increase your ability to survive nearly every disease, accident, injury. Obviously, there are exceptions to this, but for example, cancer cachexia kills 20% of those with cancer, right? You lose skeletal muscle and you die. It seems as if some chemotherapies do better with more skeletal muscle, depending. Also, we know that if you are injured or you go through a period of what we call a catabolic crisis, if you break a hip or if you find yourself in bed for a week or 2 weeks, skeletal muscle is going to be in part one of the sites in which you draw from the amino acids to help with recovery and repair. Also, your ability to maintain strength and metabolic flexibility, that's all skeletal muscle.
Can you
So
explain
yeah,
further, expand on
yeah,
metabolic flexibility?
we really want the body to do what it was designed to do. We want to be able to burn fat when we need to burn fat. We need to be able to burn carbohydrates when we need to burn carbohydrates. We need to be able to manage the substrates that are coming into the body. Skeletal muscle is a primary site at rest for fatty acid oxidation. So fats at rest are utilized by skeletal muscle. Um, Individuals that are exercising allows for glucose to be used by skeletal muscle. In fact, around 80% of glucose disposal is in skeletal muscle. Um, Exercising skeletal muscle doesn't require insulin. So skeletal muscle is this big tank, this reservoir. Um, if you do not have healthy skeletal muscle, or you get injured and you go through periods of time where you are not working out, if you destroy skeletal muscle, then if we recognize it is the site of primary glucose regulation, right?
Mhm.
The liver plays a role, but what we see in clinical practice is as people lose skeletal muscle, their blood glucose increases. Hence, their insulin then increases. Potentially, they have an issue with triglycerides, which are obviously
Right.
fats. All of these things over time create a unhealthy, inflammatory milieu in the body. And so that is why we need healthy skeletal muscle. And things can change very quickly. If you stop training and don't move for a week,
Mm.
as you're older, you will rapidly lose both strength and mass. And so it becomes really important to have these good critical habits like doing resistance training, like eating high quality protein. Do you know, I was looking at some NHANES data that 45% of women over the age of 65 were below the RDA of protein.
I believe it. I believe it just because
Crazy,
I know the women I
crazy.
talk to. I can tell you every single woman I've ever trained, and they never ate enough protein. And, when we think about an older woman, also as you're speaking, I'm thinking of this. When you see an older lady, an old, quote unquote, old lady, probably what I should thought I was going to look like at this age at 63. They're skinny. They don't have any muscle. Their
Right.
skin is falling off of them. And because they have no muscle left and they're crouching and everything hurts. So they might be thin, but they don't have any muscle left on their
That's right.
body because they're either not eating enough protein or didn't, and they never built muscle when they were in their 20s, 30s, 40s, younger. They don't have any muscle to hold on to. Well, they're not feeding the muscle. So that's why they're losing the muscle. They're
Right.
not lifting, they're not working out, they're not eating enough protein.
That's absolutely right. And the biggest thing is there are predictable things that happen, and we'd like to all not think that there are crises that will happen, but it's true. Unfortunately, these things will happen. We might be in bed for a week. We
Mm.
might injure ourselves. Who knows? But we have to prepare for, I want to say, the unexpected, because it is. And the only way to do that is to be strong and capable going into the more mature years. So, what an individual can do
Yes.
to build and maintain skeletal muscle mass. And, it's interesting because I think you personally, Jody, are such an outlier that your demographic has really been into kind of cardiovascular activity and lots of salads and eating a little bit of food,
They were
which
really big into
yeah,
keto, intermittent fasting, all of that stuff because they were looking for, I believe, a quick fix, and they thought those were the answers. Well, yeah.
I mean, definitely, as if someone wants to age well, there are a handful of things that they have to do. I'll start with diet
Mhm.
because everybody eats. 100% of people eat. And the current recommendation out there is the RDA set at the minimum. So that's the recommended dietary allowance, which is how much protein per day. people have to recognize that that was created to be a baseline, right? So this is the minimum to prevent a deficiency. What is that? That's 0.8 grams per kg. That comes out to 0.37 grams, 15 pounds. That's 45 grams of protein a day.
I know. And for the people that are plant-based, I just because my mind just goes there right away. For the people who are plant-based, and I want you to talk about this, they think that that's enough protein. They
No.
don't have any idea how much protein they actually need. What do you
Yeah.
recommend?
So the evidence supports double that to be more optimal for maintaining body composition. So the data supports 1.6 grams per kg, and that would be sufficient. Is it optimal? It's more optimal, but that comes out to 0.7 grams per pound. Is that a lot? Is it enough if we were to
Maybe if
calculate?
somebody was sedentary, right? Maybe that would, but still, it's,
I think you're playing with fire. So that would be
you're
80
right.
grams of protein. So again, these are the general recommendations. And again, the way that data is done and collected, these are typically population type study. I mean, the majority of literature, it's very difficult to translate a body of evidence based on one or two studies. So thinking about it in totality, it's safe to say that 1.7 grams per kg, in my mind, is probably the lowest I would go. And that would be the lowest to maintain what somebody is at. So if we were to calculate 0.7 grams of protein per pound of a 115-pound woman, that ends up being 80 grams of protein.
Hmm.
It's okay.
It's okay. I like to see 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. What did I say? Yeah.
Yeah.
A gram of protein per body weight. So I always use the number 100 because I'm not good at math. So if you weigh 100 pounds, you need 100 grams of protein per day. Break that up into 4 meals, 25 grams per meal. There you go.
I,
It's
I,
easy.
I think that it can be very simple.
Right. But
I
people
would even
complicate it.
say, I would even say that I'd rather have someone do 2 meals a day that are at 50 grams of protein,
Right. Right.
you
Hmm.
know?
Yep.
But I think that we have to recognize that how we think about dietary protein has to be re-examined, because many of the listeners are going to be thinking, wow, that's a really high protein diet. And I would say that that's not, because if the 0.8 grams per kg or 0.7 grams per pound is the RDA, that by definition is a minimum. That's a low protein diet.
That's not optimal.
If you double that, now you're at a moderate protein diet. A
Hmm.
high protein diet would be, and by the way, which is not negative, would be 1 gram per pound or higher. People will say there's no evidence for that. And I would say, well, first thing that you have to recognize is that for body composition, if you are looking to change body composition, 1 gram per pound ideal body weight, as you lower total calories, you must preserve skeletal muscle. So I think this is a really good strategy.
Right. So now is the question about calories.
Calories
Um,
matter. They
right.
matter.
Calories matter, but they're not all equal,
Um, I
right?
think I have to think about that statement. Calories matter. So for 1 gram of alcohol, I think there's 7 calories. For 1 gram of fat, there's 9 calories. For 1 gram of protein, there's 4. For 1 gram of carbohydrates, there's 4. There is something called the thermic effect of food
Right.
that
Let's get into
changes. So basically, it's the amount of energy it would take, or the impact that that food would have on, let's just call it metabolism, on energy usage,
Mhm.
just to simplify it. And when you eat and this varies a little bit in the literature, the percentages, and I think it has to do with the dosing of the meals. So for example, if you were to eat 100 grams of straight protein, your body may use 20% of that 100 calories, let's say 100 calories,
Right.
to, well, actually what I believe is it causes muscle to go through this process called muscle protein synthesis, which it activates this process. The body only sees a net calorie of 80. So that would be one way of thinking about things.
You,
Carbohydrates are a little lower, and then
Mhm.
fat is the lowest.
So when you're working with your patients to transform their body composition from, let's just call it from fat to fit, okay? I'm just going to simplify things here. Do you have them looking at their macronutrients, their calories? Do you look at the whole picture? What would a patient working with you have to focus on in order to reach that goal of transforming themselves into a healthier mind and body, because they go together?
Yes, they absolutely do. And actually, we have a team of nutritionists.
Mhm.
We have Julia Mitchell. She's amazing. You'll hear her on my podcast coming up. And we also have a woman named Kayla. And we have all our patients typically work with a nutritionist. I'll definitely go through all their, I mean, you have to track, you have to know what you're doing. Take 2 weeks of normal eating, track, see what kind of macros, what kind of, the quality of the food that you're having. And it's all easy to access. It's all accessible now. And then the first thing that we do is, I mean, you got to look at everything. So yes, you've got to start with diet and nutrition, because that's actually the lowest hanging fruit. And that's where we can really move the needle for people.
Right.
I mean, it's actually all encompassing because hormones play a role. There's all kinds of things that matter. But understanding where their protein is, where their carbohydrates are, where their fat is, and what kind of foods they're eating, where their fiber is, all of it.
What do you
And
say to a
then
woman who doesn't want to write those things down?
step up. You got to step up. What do you really want?
Okay,
Because once
listeners,
you
do you
figure
hear
it
that?
out,
You need to step up if you want change.
I mean, yeah, if you're happy with what you're doing right now and everything is working for you,
Mm,
then there's no need to change.
right.
But my question to you would be, why the pushback?
Mm.
There's a lot of things that we do in life that we don't want to do. A lot of people don't want to track calories. A lot of people don't want to work out. Listen, I would love to sleep in a day. All of these things, we do a lot of things that we don't want to do. I don't know. I don't like going to the dentist. I still go.
Right.
These are short-term sacrifices for long-term gain. And one doesn't have to then just track always. I don't track really anymore. I pretty much know what I do.
It's just a starting point. There has to be a starting point. So you do, once you get all their information, you do track, you have them tracking their calories, their macronutrients, their exercise, I'm
Yep.
sure. Okay.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's
Everything is
their
tracked.
right.
That's right.
And so let's go to age. In your
Yep.
book, which I love, and everybody listening must buy this book. And I will say the name again, Forever Strong. I love the name of it. It's right back there. And I have it right over here. I actually ripped out a bunch of pages because I have them taped up on the wall in front of me right here. It's so good. Let's go through the different ages. You talk about women at different ages and what happens to their body. And you mentioned hormones before.
Mhm.
So, and metabolism. So let's start with 20s. What happens to a woman's body? What starts happening in their 20s? Let's go all the way up to, like, say, 65 or 70.
So there's a few things that I want to point out before we dive into this. It's
Okay.
very difficult to talk about things in absolute. So as long as the listener
Mhm.
understands that we're providing a framework for thinking about things
Yes.
simply so that we can be of value. But the human body is very complex, that your hormones at 20 and my hormones at 20 are likely totally different,
Mhm.
that it is just a very complex human experience. And just by recognizing this, we're going to give kind of broad outlines,
Thank you.
fair to this.
Yes.
Um, and I would say that in your 20s, or let's even say, yeah, end of high school,
Okay.
women are still growing, right? They probably haven't finished growing, and your metabolism is typically pretty high at this point, and now you're menstruating. There's a lot of what I would consider metabolic flexibility. Again,
Mm.
eating, maybe not the same kind of repercussions, and that's not metabolic flexibility, but burning the things that we need to when we need to. The
Right.
other aspect that I think is very interesting is that I think that the muscle health, if you've been active, is very good. So what does that mean? That means skeletal muscle is sensitive to insulin. It doesn't have a ton of intramyocellular fat or fibrosis or changes in connective tissue that are negative.
Mhm.
Typically, um, that muscle is very robust and healthy. 20s, now you're going into your 30s. And listen, chances are you can get away with a lot in your 20s.
Right.
Does your diet need to be high protein? I mean, it probably should be, because this is the time where you're really going to start laying things down.
Right.
But is it, do you have more flexibility as you are young? You do. Frankly, you totally do.
Yeah, that decade of your 20s,
I know.
like balls to the walls, go have a good
Totally.
time.
I mean, it's
Right.
true.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
true.
But then the 30s
Um,
show up.
so then the 30s happen, and now really you're done growing.
Mm.
You don't need to rely on insulin in the same way. You're not getting taller if you are now dependent on insulin as your only way of managing blood sugar. You're going to run into problems. I think this is the decade where, if you do not pay attention to your training, this is where problems really begin, because people don't recognize that skeletal muscle just becomes more difficult to put on. You can always train it, you can always put it on, but it becomes more and more challenging as you age. It just does, whether it's because you've had
Hello.
breaks in physical activity, who knows what the reason, but it just seems to be that way. Um, and then in your 30s, this is, heart disease also and dementia also can begin in your 30s. So this
Mm.
is kind of the slow burn to really poor health later on. Skeletal muscle, while you still have high hormones naturally, this is the time where you really want to focus on maintaining as much as you can, getting in there. Well, maybe you have children, maybe you don't, but really putting in the effort, truly, truly focusing on the health of that skeletal muscle.
I feel like that's where the bulk
Yeah,
of building muscle happens. It's in your 30s. Your hormones are, for generally speaking, are optimized
yeah,
for the most part, at least in your early 30s. And that is when you should be hitting the weights and building that muscle. So when you're my age and
right.
older, you have that. Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I think that that's really absolutely
I mean, I
reasonable.
have two daughters in their 30s, and all I'm thinking about, and thank goodness they've been working out since they were teenagers because
And
I'm
this
their
is the
mom.
time, right? So
Yeah.
this is the absolute time to make it happen. So now, understanding that what you do now really matters. Now you hit your 40s, and this is the time where it seems as if a lot of responsibility happens. I don't think anything magical happens all of a sudden. You've hit your 40s, and now something is vastly different. But what happens is, two things, right? Is if you have created an excellent training base, going into your 40s, things will be much easier. They will be much easier. 40s, this is the time you have got to get your body composition under control. If you hit menopause, from my perspective as a physician who sees patients, again, this is just my clinical perspective, those individuals who hit menopause and their body composition is not where they want it to be, those patients,
Mm.
it is a really
It
big
is.
struggle for them.
It is. It is. And then they're so wrapped up in life and they don't even know where to start. And this is where a lot of stuff starts happening that isn't necessarily good. And they're trying to crawl out of that hole, and they're looking for maybe a quick fix. And they start doing all the yo-yo dieting. And it's because they didn't have, I'm
That's
being
right.
harsh here, they didn't have the discipline in their late 20s, 30s to have that routine set up, the healthy eating, the muscle building. It's hard, but they can still do it, right? We know they can still get out of there.
Jody, I think what you're saying, again, I said this before, I think you're really ahead of your time, or I think you're on time. Yes, if you can manage discipline early on, then it's not just discipline. If you are disciplined, life is much easier. If you are undisciplined, life is much more difficult.
You said that in your book.
That's right. I believe it. I mean, again, I've been seeing patients for 20 years.
Mm.
Crazy.
Yeah,
I have two very little children. I have a 3-year-old and a 4.5-year-old. And while I don't, quote, discipline them in eating, you better believe that they watch us train. We work out together. My daughter teaches a family yoga class to us.
I love it.
Discipline is not wrong. Discipline is an advantage.
Mm.
If you nail that in your 20s, I'm telling you, the rest of life, life is never easy, but it's easier. 40s, go into your 40s, man. Everyone who's in their 30s listening, nail it. Nail it in your 30s. By the time you get to your 40s, you've got kind of two choices.
Shit starts happening.
Yeah, because if you are now bringing up old habits, old challenges, those challenges, when you should be able to focus on your family or your career or other things, they really seem to affect women's mental health. You know, a lot of women hit their late 40s and now they're kind of perimenopause and they get a visceral belly fat. All of a sudden they have a belly that they never had. All kinds of things happen. Now they're getting night sweats. Again, lots of changes begin to happen that are inevitable for everybody, right? So every female will go through menopause. But how one goes through that is variable. So your 40s, man, if you have not done it, you better get to work.
I am
That
so glad you're saying this.
that means you're not skipping training days. There's no, I'm just going to eat this. Your margin of error is now greatly reduced. And you have to recognize the fact that if you do not stay on top of yourself, then your next decade, from a strength, power perspective, you are going to need to be really focused on training. And I think 40s, you still have some flexibility, but again, it's earned. So you will have flexibility in your 40s depending on how you did in your 30s.
Now let's go to 50s, which is
50s.
could
And I
be
also, yes, and I also want to say I'm a strong believer in hormone replacement. I think that there was a study called the Women's Health Initiative, really did a lot of damage for women and men, quite frankly, in terms of understanding the safety and efficacy of hormone replacement. No, that's not utilized to manage, quote, body composition, but I will tell you,
right.
I mean, testosterone is not even FDA approved for women, which is crazy, but
Mhm.
um, there are off-label uses for this. Many women have much lower testosterone than would be ideal for them. Things to kind of manage and mitigate body composition. Again, it's not just all about muscle, but I come from a muscle perspective because if you nail the foundation and architecture of your body first, which is muscle, bone, and muscle, then the rest is, you can layer things on. So again, I will just mention hormone replacement. I
I'm
think is
glad you did. I'm glad you did mention it. I wish, I didn't start until I was 60. And thank goodness I got in there within that window at 60. And I've never felt better. I've been doing it for 3 years now. And a lot of people message me and ask me, well, the reason you look that way, Jody, is because you're taking hormones. And I'm like, no, no, that was just layered on top. It's all this work I've done for the last 40 years. And then I get to layer that on top of it. So I appreciate you saying that because I think hormone replacement therapy, bioidentical hormone replacement therapy gets a bad rap, and people really need to understand it and be educated. So explain what happens to a woman in her 50s.
okay. So 50s now, typically you've gone through the average age, women go through menopause anywhere. I think that the average age right now is 50. But again, that's just the average age. The 50s, your hormones, now you have somewhat, again, you don't just hit menopause and then this all of a sudden your hormones stop. It's typically over years of ebbs and flows of estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. But this is the time where, for example, if someone's progesterone is low or they're having other hormone changes, that you might get sleep apnea testing. We see changes in sleep patterns. We know that sleep is really important for body composition. Individuals may see lower levels of estrogen. Testosterone seems to be hit or miss. Sometimes it's high, sometimes it's low. Again, everyone is biologically diverse in that way. But in your 50s, you really have to focus on strength training. And I would also argue that, people, I think slow, steady state zone 2 training it's all the rage right now. And I would say that it can be challenging for people, for everybody, but I think that there are better ways to get the job done. For example, high intensity interval training. How do we put enough effort in, right? The cost, there's always a cost to doing business. And I think the physiology or the cost of slow, steady state endurance over time can be somewhat draining for people. Again, I've seen
It
this,
is.
just seen this over time. So resistance training, a minimum 3 days a week, making sure that they're doing some kind of plyometric uh, speed training. You've got to start now thinking, if you fall, can you catch yourself? If you trip, are you quick? Things of that nature. And then also full range of motion training. I think moving the joints through full range of motion. I think all of this is really beneficial.
Because in your 50s, you do start, I know I started, well, after I turned 60, worrying about falling. And I have a big dog and she pulls me a lot. And I thought to myself thought about all the women who've never done any type of strength training and what would happen if this happened to them. And that's why it's so important to do that strength training. And also, can you touch on the benefits of how it helps us cognitively? So you're a woman in your 50s, you need to get in the strength training at least 3 times a week, do some HIIT workouts. And when you were talking about the possibility of falling, your brain
Mhm.
and your body working together.
Yeah. So we have to recognize that falls, this is a risk for individuals. And again, it's never too late to start, but we have to plan for this is hard to say because I don't want to say that we have to plan for what's going to go wrong, but we have to be physically capable. And I don't
Well,
want
it's the
to
reason we
go off.
save money for retirement, right? It's the same. I think you use that analogy in your book too. You've got to, you got to prepare for the future. This is you
And
preparing for
it,
the future.
yeah, and I don't want it to be like doomsday, but the reality is what causes people to become more and more isolated. They can't do activities of daily living. They can't carry their own groceries. They're going to be slow in line. They can't move as fast. And so understanding that training, so we know what will happen to a person who is more sedentary. We know that their strength is going to decrease. We know that they're going to have metabolic consequences. We know that there are things that will happen. We know that they will lose muscle mass and also strength, and the fiber types change. We know that these things are coming. It's kind of like being on a train and you know the train is going off the cliff, but all you have to do is get off the train.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and so understanding that 3 days a week is not a big ask of
No.
some kind of resistance training. You can start with, I don't care, start with body weights, move to bands, and then progress to
Light weights.
kettlebell. I
Right.
mean, but we're not training to become better at working out. We're training to become more capable in life. And then in your 60s, we have to think about how do you want to, what are the things that are important? How do you want to live? Are you someone who likes tennis? My mentor, Dr. Donald Lehman, he still plays tennis every week. Now, really beginning to think and pick and choose what are the activities that are really meaningful and how do you want to keep those? I don't think I don't think we know what quote normal aging looks like. I think Jody, you are more of an example of what is possible, and that's where we need to move people to. How can we show people what is possible? And part of that is there's a handful of people that have really challenged the narrative and done things their own way, like you and the um, healthy hedonista. Like there are people that have really changed the way things are done.
And thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it. I don't know how we can help more people. I think there has to be, you've got a best-selling book here, reaching so many people, talking about it on your podcast, on YouTube. You have so much experience. You are a doctor who can speak about these things from a place where I cannot speak about it. And I think we I'm hoping we can inspire people to take that step, to have the courage to change and to take action. If they don't know how to, reach out to people like us, find a trainer in your area. What would you
Totally.
suggest?
Yes. So there's a lot of resources online. This is not something that has to be done alone. You have to understand that we have more access to confusion, but we also have more access to solutions than ever before. I have a community. I think you have a community. We do Q&As every week. We just did a protein forward challenge. We had 3,000 people sign up. We talked about exercise. We talked about nutrition. It was amazing.
Love that.
And it's a very low cost. I think that, allocating resources to do training in person if you can is really important. Doesn't have to happen because, again, there's so many different ways. But I think as you're learning, you can go to the YMCA.
Right.
They have classes at the YMCA.
They do.
Um,
They do. And every type of movement, it could start,
yeah.
as you mentioned, as simple as just moving your own body. For the person that I know that it's never worked out, they're in their 50s, 60s, maybe 60s. What do I do now? Walk. Just get outside and walk. It's good for your head. It's good for your body. You start feeling your heart rate going up, maybe sweat a little bit. You'll feel it. You don't have to do a lot real fast. And I think so many women think that they do. And it's a huge passion of mine to help as many women as I possibly can in my own way. Um, because I do see a lot of women my age suffering because they didn't do the deposits that, not to in their 30s, in their
I mean, it must
40s,
be wild for you.
It
It
is.
must be wild for you. And how old are you? Am I allowed to ask how old you are?
Yeah, I turned 63 in December. I'm 63. Yeah.
I mean, so it must be wild for you to see how you have aged
Mhm.
and how um, many of your cohorts have aged.
Yeah, yeah. And
It's
they
not
come
about
up to me.
comparison. I want
No,
to
no,
clarify
not at
something.
all. No.
We are not talking about comparison. What I want to clarify is that there is possibility, and that should be inspiring for people.
Yeah.
Should be really inspiring.
Right. And it's not about the way you look, but it's the way you feel, and it's the way you want to live your life. So we have about 2 minutes left. If you could tell everybody how they could get in touch with you, how they can work with you, and maybe your last tip to leave people thinking about how they can change their life.
Yes, you can meet our entire team if they go to my website, drgabriellelyon.com. We have nutritionists if they need nutrition help. We have coaches, physical fitness. We have other doctors and physician assistants. We have a full spectrum of offerings for people if they need that. You can find me on Instagram. I'm very active. I have my own podcast called the Dr. Gabrielle Lyon Show. You can sign up to our newsletter. All this stuff is free. Newsletter is free. I also have a recipe email that goes out every week. And we do challenges. And the challenges are a great way to connect and get questions answered as well. I don't think that I'm forgetting anything. Yeah, YouTube,
No,
all the places. I think I got
all
it.
the places. And
Yeah.
one last thing, we have 30 seconds left. If you can just tell our listeners one thing that they could take away real fast, what would it be from this?
Don't let complexity get in the way of very simple actions.
Hmm.
It doesn't have to be complicated to be effective.
I love that. Thank you so much, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. This is her book, Forever Strong. Please go out and get it. It is an easy read. You did not make this complicated. You made it as simple as possible. So everybody go out and buy this book, listen to her podcast, watch her on YouTube, and follow her on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, everywhere, everywhere. Thank you so, so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. And for everybody listening, thank you for tuning in today. And until next week, go live your most fearlessly authentic life, everybody. Bye-bye.